Okay, looks like we're recording. And guys, I am so excited and so honored to have on the program Alex Hershaft. Alex, welcome to the program. This is such an honor and a joy to meet you. It's the first time I've met you.
Thank you, Jeremy. Yeah, glad to be here.
Yeah, I've known about you for a long time, and you're such a legend of our movement. Just like a larger than life figure, and here you are, so soft spoken. So it's so interesting, and it's just
There's,
nice.
the soft speaking comes with age.
Maybe so, yeah, because you've done quite a bit of loud campaigning, I'm sure, back in your day, which we'll get
Yeah.
into. Um, so Alex, for those of you who don't know, is most famous for being a Holocaust survivor who went on to make animal rights his life's passion, and he spent his life defending animals. Just an incredible story. Um, Alex, I'm going to be super original and creative and ask you to just go all the way back to the beginning. If you could start there and just kind of tell us a little bit about your childhood story, because obviously your childhood was very different than most everybody else's that I've been speaking to.
Right. Well, I hope not to be famous for being a Holocaust survivor. That's something that that surviving the Holocaust, the credit is due entirely to my parents and my grandparents. I was just an innocent bystander, and I had this wonderful team of about 7 people who were taking care of me and making sure that I would survive, even if the rest of them did not. So I owe it entirely to them. I don't take any credit for surviving the Holocaust. I hope to be somewhat famous for my work on behalf of animals, which we'll get into. Anyway, I was just to do a brief recount of the early stages of my life. I was 5 years old when the Nazis invaded Poland in September 1st, 1939. And that was followed by a number of decrees against Jews, like loss of bank accounts, not inability to use public transport, and so forth. But the big change came in the summer of 1940, when all Jews in the general area of Warsaw were ordered under penalty of death to move into the old Jewish section of Warsaw, which was tiny and inhabited mainly by elderly Jews who had not assimilated into the Polish society. And it made the conditions very uncomfortable because of the crowding. You had we ended up with a population of around 450,000 in a tiny section of Warsaw, which meant that most people had to uh, basically live with 5 or 6 other strangers in one room. It was
Mhm.
very uncomfortable. And then the area was surrounded by a brick wall topped by barbed wire. And that in the fall of 1940, in fact, on Yom Kippur, coincidentally, the Nazis declared the existence of the Warsaw Ghetto, and uh, people trying to leave the ghetto, or people who were Jewish and failed to enter the ghetto, would be punishable by death, as most German decrees were punishable by death.
Mhm.
They didn't go through elaborate trials. It was usually summary executions.
Yeah.
So we were pretty fortunate in that we were able to move in with my grandparents, who had a nice apartment in the Jewish section. And we also had a Russian maid who, because she was not Jewish, she was initially not allowed to come into the ghetto. but she had powerful friends in what was then called the White Russian Society. The White Russians were the people who lost the war against the Bolsheviks in the Civil War of 1917 through 1920. And many of them had escaped to Poland and other surrounding areas because the Red Bolsheviks did not treat them kindly.
Mm.
And so the White Russian Society became kind of a cultural Russian language and literature society. The Germans cultivated them because they assumed that once they conquered Russia, these people would become their missionaries, their tokens. They would basically become their vassals and do their bidding in running the country. So through the White Russian Society, she was able to get a permit to live in the ghetto, which was very unusual. But then another problem arose, and because she was Christian, she was entitled to decent food. And living in the ghetto would not allow her to have decent food. So then she would need another permit allowing her to do her food shopping outside the ghetto and bring food into the ghetto. Well, you can guess where that was leading.
Mm-hmm.
It basically became a weekly exercise where we would collect jewelry and other goods from our friends and neighbors. And she would then take them outside the ghetto and trade them for food and bring food into the ghetto for us and our friends and neighbors. And this is basically what counted more than anything I can think of for me and my mother surviving. Because if you did not have an outside source of food, it was very difficult to survive in the Warsaw Ghetto. It is estimated within the first 2 years of the ghetto, it's estimated that around 80,000 people perished from hunger and disease. Typhus was rampant. The reduced food rations were probably deliberate because the Germans weren't sure why they were ordered to put us in the ghetto, and neither did we. I mean, no one contemplated the thought that we were put there just to be murdered. It was inconceivable. I mean, in what was considered modern times, that hundreds of thousands of people would be murdered deliberately. That concept didn't exist. So we were, but the Germans did have an idea that we probably, if a few of us died, that would be okay. So the food ration were severely restricted, and a number of people, as I noted, did die of hunger.
Was this food service, ability that your family had, was this did this end up resulting in your ability to escape? Was that the method?
Yes and no. So yeah. So anyway, this is how things continued until July of 1942, 1942. What happened in July of 1942 is that the death camp of Treblinka was ready to receive its first victims. And so basically what happened is there would be mass transport of inhabitants of the ghetto into cattle cars on the way to Treblinka, which was about 60 miles away. Conditions in the cattle cars were atrocious. People had no ability to sit down or lie down. They had to stand all the way. There was no opportunity to have any food or water or to relieve themselves. And although the trip was only 60 kilometers, or theoretically an hour, sometimes it would last several days, because if the gas chambers were working too hard or would break down, and people were in the cattle cars, that they had no facility at Treblinka to store people. They had no accommodations. So if they couldn't gas people immediately, they would just leave them in the cattle cars. But anyway, we were able to, and that continued till September, for a couple of months, late July, all of August, and part of September. The way we were able to survive that was my father was working for the Jewish Council, which was sort of handling the food distribution. And they were considered essential because the roundups of the summer of 1942 were not intended to wipe out the entire population of the Warsaw Ghetto. The Treblinka gas chambers couldn't handle that, couldn't handle all. So let's see the math. So we started with 450, about 80,000 died of hunger and disease, leaving around 330,000, if my math is approximately correct. So about nearly 300,000 were either exported to Treblinka or died in the process, leaving around 50,000 people in the ghetto. So they still needed to be dealt with. The Jewish Council was still a working entity in handling food distribution and that sort of thing, civil matters. And my dad was considered essential. So they set up a building that was entirely for the staff of the Jewish Council, and not their families, just for the staff themselves. The families were not eligible. However, the building had little closets, like most buildings do. And so the families would head in the closets, and the closets would be hidden by a large armoire. That's a piece of furniture that's not used in the United States, but it was like an external closet. It was called an armoire. And that was large enough to cover the door, so you couldn't see that there was a door behind it. And this is where the families survived. And the reason that we needed to hide was because the Germans would inspect the building to make sure that the families were not there, only the essential personnel. And how we would know is because the German inspectors would be accompanied by Jewish policemen who were working for them, and the Jewish policemen had their families hidden there as well. So that's how we knew when it was time to hide. Anyway, once the roundups were over in September of 1942, we realized that the uncertainty of what would happen to us in the ghetto was now over. There was no uncertainty left. So the only way to survive was to leave the ghetto. The problem with leaving the ghetto is kind of going from the fire pen into the fire, because first you needed a source of income, but more importantly, you needed documentation, because if you were suspected of being Jewish, you were shot immediately.
Wow.
So we were fortunate in that sense that my father's sister had been passing for Christian. She married a Christian name and became a famous actress in Poland.
Mm.
And she did not go into the ghetto, even though there was a penalty of death. She was hoping that she would not get denounced, and she wasn't. So, in order to reconcile herself with not going into the ghetto, she decided to work for the Polish resistance movement, and she was storing their weapons for them.
Mm.
But anyway, the point is that we had a place to go, and through her underground contacts, she was able to fabricate false documents for us that would provide some measure of safety.
Wow, this is yeah. I just wanted to jump in, just give you a little break a second, but I want to ask you, we're talking about a couple of like and I know the dates are so it's hard to remember like all specific dates, but it sounds like it was a couple of years that you were in this ghetto. This is, when I think back to my childhood when I was 5, 6, 7, I don't remember a ton from those days. How much of this do you remember personally? And I'm wondering, like, and not to take you back to a dark place, hopefully with some time, it's easier. But I'm wondering if you can kind of describe, like, kind of put us there so that we can kind of experience some of what you were sensing, at least through your words.
The best way to experience what it was like to be in the ghetto is to watch the Roman Polanski film, The Pianist. It's
Great
an
film.
extremely faithful rendition of what it was like to live in the Warsaw Ghetto.
Wow. So you do have pretty clear memories from that time?
Mostly, but some of it was refreshed through memories of my mother. My mother survived along with me, and we had her recount her experience in great detail and record it and then transcribed it into English.
I remember The Pianist being an incredibly powerful movie. I think Adrian Brody won a Oscar for
Yes,
that
yes,
performance.
he
It was
did.
it was wonderful. So yeah, I'll have to go and revisit that because it's been decades since I've seen. I think I was pretty young when I saw that film. Um, but what an incredible story. I mean, we're talking your early years. I'm sure some of your earliest memories, if not your earliest memories, spent in this really. And one of the takeaways that I hear from this, and I think is just hard to understand, is just the chaos. It sounded to me like chaotic, confusing. You even described the Germans as not really understanding what's happening to the full extent, especially in the early part of what was going on. It must have just been terrifying. I mean, absolutely terrifying. As a child, as a 5, 6 year old, did you have at least some shield of like ignorance, not really understanding the full extent of what was going on that helped you kind of like maybe get through it more?
Yeah, I think so. I think it was easier for me than for the adults, partly because I didn't really have much recollection of normal life,
Right.
and partly because they were shielding me so much,
They were
protecting me.
they were shooing you, like trying to keep you quiet.
Shielding.
Oh,
Yeah,
shielding you.
yeah.
Yeah, right, right. Um, yeah. So and this, going through school, we're taught the story of Anne Frank, and the hiding, and you've described this hiding. I wonder if you have memories from the times when you were just like completely in hiding. Um, do you have memories of like when the Germans would come and inspect and that sort of thing?
Well, that was that period during the major roundups when we were hiding in that special privileged building designed for Jewish council employees.
hmm Well, I don't want to jump ahead, but when you're describing, the cattle cars. Of course, my mind goes to what we're doing to animals. And it was basically an exact description of how animals are transported to slaughterhouses where they can't lie down, or I mean, I guess they could lay down, but they can't lie down comfortably. Sometimes they're so crammed in. I know you know this so well that you see feces and urine because the animals can't go. They're dealing with the harsh weather of the transport. They're not given food and water. I think even and I'm not an expert on the laws, but I think there's even like a period of time that they're allowed to not be fed. I could be wrong. Don't quote me on that, but like 24 hours or something like that. So that, yeah, they're just dealing with this extreme discomfort.
Well,
And
there is the 28-hour law,
mm,
but that applies mostly to trains and ships. Animals are transported by trucks, so the law does not apply.
right, yeah, exactly. So yeah, this I mean, obviously this shaped your early life and where you went from there.
Very much. And sometimes people will ask whether my Holocaust background affected my dedication to animal rights. And I think it definitely did, because uh, being in the Warsaw Ghetto was very much like being an animal. You woke up in the morning and you try to find enough food and try hard enough not to get killed so you could live another day. And it was life one day at a time, basically. And that's how animals live today and every
Yeah.
day.
Can you tell
So
me,
it's very easy for me to identify with what an animal goes through.
yeah, and can you tell me why it is that you're able to do that? I know that some people, jump to, oh, this is insulting, this comparison. You're comparing me to an animal. You don't, it seems that never occurred to you. You just empathize with the victim, regardless of which body they were in. Um, uh, why do you think there's sometimes this sort of intense backlash uh, when this is discussed, and this intense like defense mechanism that's put up and anger?
Yeah. Well, so the Holocaust has become a semi-religious element in Jewish life, uh, probably just as sacred as the Torah, as as Jewish religion, and it's unfortunately all for the wrong reasons. It was expressed to me by my own mother when I visited her in Israel in the 1950s. And back then, there was some discrimination against the Arab population in Israel, nowhere near where it is today. But they were granted near equal rights, but not quite.
Hmm.
And there was a lot of violence as well. And I asked my mother, I said, how can you live in a country that acts like that towards its Arab citizens? And she said, we're entitled to do this to the Arabs because of what the Nazis did to us. Uh, there aren't very many people who will say this out loud. This is the quiet part that you don't say out loud. But there is no doubt in my mind that a lot of the atrocities that Israel is committing against the people in Gaza and the West Bank is motivated by that same kind of thinking, that because we are Jews, we're entitled. So the problem, if you draw any comparison with what we do to animals with what the Nazis did to us, the first line of defense and the first objection is that we are committing sacrilege against the religion of the Holocaust.
Hmm.
And that ends the discussion right there. You're insulting my religion, so to speak. But if you are allowed to discuss it further, which rarely happens, the next step is the one you pointed out, where you're comparing the moral value or the value of the life of a pig with the value of the life of a Jew. And of course, we're, we're nowhere near to, I mean, how could I compare the value of the life of my family with the value of the life of a bunch of pigs? It's ridiculous. It's insulting to even consider that. No, that's not what we're comparing. And in fact, we're not comparing victims at all. What we're comparing is the oppressors and the mindset of the oppressors and the social norms that allow the oppressors in both cases to commit their atrocities. This is the fascinating part. And when I have studied the similarities, which I have for the past 3 years, I have found that that there is very little difference in both the motives and the social norms and what allows the people committing the atrocities to be any different. In other words, so for example, one of the things I found kind of remarkable in comparison is the personnel structures in the two processes. So in each process, we have three levels of personnel. We have what I call the enablers. These are the people who make sure that the process goes on. The minute they stop, literally, the minute they stopped, the process would stop. The process cannot continue for another hour, maybe not minute, but for another hour, without the full consent of the enablers. Okay. The next level are the implementers. These are the people made famous by Hannah Arendt with her book on the banality of evil. These are the Adolf Eichmanns. These are the people who never killed anybody, would never consider killing anybody. They mean no harm. They have no ideology. They have no motives except to A, please the enablers, and B, provide for the executioners. That's all they do. That's their only job. That's all they aspire to. Basically, Adolf Eichmann is the embodiment of the implementers. And then you have the next level, the last level, which are the executioners, the people doing the actual killing. And I found this. So let's go back through it. So who are the enablers? Well, obviously, in the Holocaust case, it was the top hierarchy of the Nazi Party. It was the Hitler, the Himmler, Goebbels, and the people most closely associated with the Nazi regime. Who are the enablers in the slaughter of animals for food?
I would say that would be the government who allows it through laws, or perhaps the bosses of the companies who never do the killing. Oh no, I'm getting it wrong. What is it?
It's our best friends.
It's our best friends.
Our sons and daughters.
Okay, I see.
The people who pay for it at the supermarket checkout counter.
Right.
If they stopped, this process would stop immediately.
Right.
Within 24 hours, there would be no more killing.
Right, exactly.
Okay, let's move on.
Okay.
We can come back to this. The next level, which is the implementers, no difference. people just doing their job, keeping the lights on, paying the bills, making sure the trains run on time.
Mm-hmm.
No difference at all.
Right.
The big difference is in the executioners. In my book, I identify 5 groups of executioners of the Holocaust. 4 of the 5, and I can get into more detail if you want. 4 of the 5 are motivated by what? Hatred of the
Money.
Jews?
Money.
No.
Oh, social norms, perhaps.
Yes, social norms, but be more specific. Fear of death.
Oh, fear of death. I may have put also just sort of fear of ostracization.
Death.
Death. Okay. Fear of death.
I can take
Which
this
makes
apart
sense. Yeah.
if you want.
Yeah.
Okay.
Go for it.
So, okay, starting. So, the first group. So, most people don't understand where and when the Holocaust took place, but it actually took place in 3 phases. Phase 1 was sometimes referred to as Holocaust by bullets, which started with the invasion of the Soviet Union by the Nazis on June 22nd, 1941. The armies, the powerful German army, of course, the first, the aircraft would come and bomb and soften up the resistance. Then the tanks would come in, and then the German army would come in after the tanks. That's how they invaded Poland. That's how they invaded Russia, or the Soviet Union. What came after the army? The Einsatzgruppen. What are the Einsatzgruppen? They were carefully selected German civilians, police, or could be from anywhere. What was their mission? To round up Jews and kill them. Why did they need special people for that? Why didn't they use the German army? Because the German army had problems shooting civilians. So they had these specially trained, specially led Germans who were willing to shoot civilians. Okay, so what was their motive? Why did they hate Jews, or what was their motive? Well, what was their choice? What would they be doing if they weren't coming after the German army and shooting civilian Jews? They would be in the German army getting killed.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Right?
Right.
So it was fear of death.
Right.
Okay, so that's the first group of executioners. The second group is how did they find Jews? I mean, Jews don't look at it. Some Jews look different. Okay, the Hasidic Jews, they have these black kaftans and they pay us and so forth. But most Jews don't look any different. Most Jews in Eastern Europe were totally assimilated. My family was totally assimilated. We were not considered Jews. We were considered just people, Poles. They had powerful friends. They had Eastern European anti-Semites. And the anti-Semites were the only group who was not motivated by fear of death. They were motivated by financial gain. Because if they could expose their Jewish neighbors to the Einsatzgruppen, their neighbors would be gone and they would get their house and their property.
Wow.
Okay, so that's the second group. That's the only group that's motivated by something other than fear of death. The third group was the so-called Travniki men. The Travniki men were Soviet prisoners of war. Now, the Germans would execute their prisoners of war. They didn't follow any Geneva Conventions. And but they made a deal with the Soviet prisoners of war in this one prisoner of war camp. They said, "How would you like to kill some Jews in exchange for your life?" Well, these people probably didn't like Jews particularly, and if they could save their own life in the process, wow, what a deal!
Mm-hmm.
So they would sign up. They signed up about 5,000 of them in a camp called Travniki near Lublin. That's why they're called Travniki men. And their express purpose was to help exterminate Jews in the Holocaust. So they were their main activity was in doing the roundups in the ghettos. By the way, the Warsaw Ghetto was only the biggest, but it was not unique. There were about 1,000 ghettos in Poland.
Hmm.
And the Travniki men were assigned to help with the roundups. And then in the actual death camps, they were doing most of the dirty work. So that was the Travniki men, again, fear of death.
Hmm.
And then finally, the last group was the assessment, the people who ran the camps, who administered the camps.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What would they be doing if they were not administering the camps?
Probably killed as well.
They would be out getting killed on the Russian front.
Right.
Precisely. Right. So it was fear of death for them too.
Hmm.
But then the other argument they would make is that they did not kill Jews. They just made things work.
Okay.
They were implementers. They were not executioners.
Right.
The people who did the actual killing were the Travniki men.
Right. So there was no blood on their hands, according to their own conscience.
Right. And there was recently a movie, wasn't there, about the commandant at Auschwitz living just outside the...
I was going to ask you if you had seen that, because I found that film to be incredibly powerful, and I don't believe that the filmmaker intended this to be any kind of allegory for animal ag, but it could very well be an allegory for that.
Yes. And it was a little bit of a statement, a little bit of an exaggeration, but it made the point that the SS men were living there. Yeah. They were living in the death camp. They were not living far away. They were not commuting. They were living there.
Yeah. And in the film, and maybe this is what's exaggerated, is like, they have like this beautiful garden and a swimming pool, and they're having picnics. Maybe that's the exaggeration.
It was a little bit exaggerated, but it made the point.
Right.
So that's the fourth group. And who are the fifth group? That's the most tragic group of all.
Probably the people shoving the Jews into the gas chambers.
Fellow Jews.
Oh, fellow Jews, right. Yeah.
Well, yes and no. Okay, so let's be a little more detailed oriented. So the preparation for the gas chambers was fellow Jews. So they're removing the clothing, cutting the hair, removing valuables, sorting, storing the valuables, storing the hair. That was done by fellow Jews. The actual physical shoving and pushing, and that was done by the Travniki men. Mm-hmm. When the gassing was complete, the bodies again were removed and buried or cremated by fellow Jews, called Sonderkommando. Now you ask, why were they doing that? Well, again, fear of death. Yes,
Right.
they would die, but they would die a few days later.
Mm-hmm.
And they were willing to do that because it would buy them an extra 2, 3 days of life.
Mm. Oh, I see. I see.
So my point is that these are all people, all 4 or 5 of these groups is what we would generally refer to as monsters who made the Holocaust possible. And yet, with one exception, 4 of the 5 groups were motivated by fear of their own death in conducting the Holocaust. It's not that they love Jews. Nobody will accuse them that they care about Jews, but they were not motivated to do the actual atrocities by their hatred for Jews. Their main motive was fear of death.
Right. And when you talked about earlier, like how did they find the Jews? You mentioned that they had some powerful people who could do this, but also I was thinking also people who had fear of death would be turning on each other, I would imagine. I wonder if turning each other in to save their own lives. Did you know of examples of that?
No, because
Mm.
if your life was in danger, I mean, there was only 2 reasons why your life would be in danger. One was if you were Jewish, and the other if you were a member of resistance. And if you were in a position to turn somebody in, uh, well, I mean,
You were too close to it, right?
well, it depends. If you were, there was no such thing that if I turn somebody in, my own life will be spared. There's no such thing.
I see. Okay.
It depended totally on who you were. If
Mm-hmm.
you were a Jew turning in another Jew, you would both be killed.
Mm-hmm.
If you were a member of the resistance turning in a member of the resistance, you would both get killed.
Mm.
So if you were not guilty of this capital sin of being Jewish or a member of the resistance, then yes, you could turn somebody in, and you would not get a reward, but you certainly wouldn't be punished.
Mm. Wow. Yeah.
So anyway, continuing with the analogy, so that's vastly different, the executioners, because the executioners of the animal slaughter are not motivated by fear of death, but they're motivated by similar fear, the fear of not being able to provide for their families, because these are typically undocumented immigrants or people without any skills and totally unable to get any other job. They're basically the dregs of society. They suffer tremendous rate of injuries, physical and mental. They end up, if they don't get injured physically, they end up becoming alcoholics or beating their wives and children, that sort of thing. It's a terrible life to be an executioner in the slaughter of animals for food. These people are really to be pitied more than hated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I don't think I've known a few people who've worked in slaughterhouses, but the people that I've talked to the most are people who have worked in a slaughterhouse for the purpose of, being undercover. Um and so they're just dealing with like a couple weeks of it. And it changed them, like that couple of weeks. And then of course a lot of these people that you're describing who are working in slaughterhouses are doing it for a lengthy amount of time, obviously more than 2 weeks to feed their families. And yeah. And I mean, hopefully, and I don't think animal rights maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong. I think that most animal rights activists recognize that and remember that. Um, has that been your experience, or do you have to, sort of remind people of that sometimes? Because obviously, as animal rights activists, like there's anger, and that comes with that. I certainly feel it towards people who are being terrible to animals, and but I've never forgotten that point. But what would you say to that?
I'm not sure I follow your line of questioning.
I was sort of just wondering if, in your experience in the movement, have you encountered a lot of people who have kind of forgotten, basically that the slaughterhouse workers are people who are in desperate situations rather than uh, just feeling intense anger at them and hatred. Uh, as you said they should be pitied, not hated. And have you encountered a lot of people who have expressed hatred versus pity?
I have not encountered any feelings of hatred towards slaughterhouse workers in any of my 50 years of working
Wow.
for
Wow.
animal rights. The my source, my major, most revolutionary source of information on that subject came from the book by Gail Eisnitz, The Slaughterhouse. That book changed my life.
Wow.
It basically, I was kind of dabbling in animal rights back in the 70s and 80s. I mean, I was, I was sold on the notion, but it was kind of an avocation. It wasn't a passion. When I read Gail's book, first of all, I cried for 3 days. I
Wow.
couldn't stop crying because of the atrocities that she describes from her interviews with slaughterhouse workers. And then when I stopped crying, I said, okay, no more nice guy. I mean, this is no longer an avocation. This is my passion from now on. This
Mhm.
cannot continue. This kind of evil cannot continue. But again, it's evil to us, but it's people get caught up in it.
Mhm.
They don't think of themselves as evil. They and they're being manipulated by the implementers, and the implementers are being manipulated by the enablers, and the enablers are our best friends.
Right, exactly. Well, a really quick note about Gail.
This is the tragedy.
Yes, it is. Um, Gail was on my program because of her new memoir. I brought her on. She has since become a dear friend of mine. What a lovely person she is. I'm wondering, does she know the impact that Slaughterhouse had on
Yeah,
her?
yeah.
Wow. Okay. Um, yeah, and just to let people know, I have not read Slaughterhouse. I read Out of Sight, her new memoir. And Slaughterhouse was described sort of in the blurbs as like a modern day The Jungle by Upton Sinclair. Kind of goes through the whole industry and everything. Um,
Well, except it has a lot of interviews. She spent a couple of years just hanging around bars outside slaughterhouses and talking to the slaughterhouse workers when they were off, uh, trying to forget their jobs by drinking alcohol.
right.
And they were pretty open in describing their work.
Yeah. Um, wow. Can you take me back to, I've heard you've described this before, when you first witnessed a slaughterhouse, I guess, when you were employed by this environmental, what was it? This environmental consulting firm, and they sent you to this Midwestern slaughterhouse. Can you Can you tell me about that?
Yeah. So in 1972, I went to work for a Washington consulting firm, one of the biggest,
Hmm.
and because of my background in chemistry, they decided that I should become an expert in hazardous waste management.
Hmm.
So there was no internet back there, but there were books. So I brushed up on hazardous waste and hazardous waste management, and I quickly became an expert because no one else knew anything about it.
Hmm.
So uh, the consulting industry is an interesting phenomenon in Washington. It's basically a bunch of, I don't know, maybe I don't know how many, maybe 100 organizations that basically don't know much about anything.
Mm.
They just find out what the needs of various government agencies are, unfilled needs.
Mm.
And then they try to hire people who know something about those needs. And they submit proposals on how they will take care of those needs to the government, and they get contracts. And this has been going on for probably since World War II, it, but it's still going. So I worked for three of those firms, but this was the first one. And again, there was a need for hazardous waste management. So they said, okay, well, here's somebody with a degree in chemistry. He should be able to figure it out.
Mm.
And yeah. So anyway, yeah, they sent me to this Midwestern slaughterhouse to do an inventory of their wastewater problems, how to deal with the wastewater. And I was already a vegetarian back then, but it was a very personal thing. It was like being gluten free
Mm.
or or not into sugar. Or it was
Dietary.
it was nothing to do with animals. It was very personal. I didn't know any other vegetarians. I didn't even know if I qualified as vegetarian.
Hmm.
Didn't know what the requirements were. It was just a dietary personal decision. So I thought, it's another industrial assignment. So I went there. I met the director, the manager of the slaughterhouse. He was very nice. He introduced me around. And the next morning, I went out there with my notebook and started going through their waste area, not the slaughter part, but
Hmm.
the waste area, and to making notes about any wastewater problems. And I was walking around and I turned a corner and I was facing these piles of hearts and lungs and heads and legs and other body parts.
Yeah.
And it immediately brought back flashbacks of human remains that I saw at the Auschwitz Museum when I visited there. The hair, the glasses, the shoes. And I said, my God, is there some kind of a connection here that I was not aware of? Are we doing to the animals what the Nazis did to us?
Hmm.
Did I suddenly transform myself from a victim of the Holocaust to the oppressor of animals without anybody asking my permission?
Mm.
It really bothered me for months. I couldn't complete the assignment. Obviously, had to fly back. I couldn't sleep for weeks afterwards. I could not find anyone to share my trauma with, there was no one who would understand. I mean, I would be considered weird, as
Mhm.
as some people still are considered today.
Mhm.
But back then, that was totally inconceivable. I mean, eating animals not was not only normal, but it was necessary. Americans did not get permission to avoid meat until the Senate Select Committee on Nutrition and Human Needs report came out in 1977. Back then, it was considered necessary to eat animals. I myself was convinced that it was necessary. I
Mhm.
just didn't like the way it was taking place.
Yeah.
So I finally, my comfort finally came from reading Isaac Bashevis Singer short stories, where he said, for the animals, all men are Nazis, and for the animals, life is an eternal Treblinka. And then I realized that there was at least one other person who shared my concerns, my trauma, my dilemma. And this person was a fellow Jew. And he was a fellow Jew from my hometown of Warsaw,
Wow. Yeah.
a fellow. Back then I didn't realize that he would become famous one day.
Oh, was he not famous at that time?
Well, he was just a writer of short stories. This
Interesting.
this was in '72. He didn't get his Nobel Prize for Literature till 6 years later.
Wow. So can I ask you, were you searching? So it wasn't known, I guess, at that time that there was this incredibly powerful quote. That it's not like we have the internet today where it's like, oh, I'm suddenly interested in animal rights. Google, scholars talking about animal rights, and Isaac Bashevis Singer pops up. No, you were just reading his stories and came across it by chance.
Yeah, I don't remember the exact details. Maybe somebody suggested it.
Mm, interesting. But were you in this period of, you mentioned, like, stress and trauma you were dealing with, of like coming to grips with this, were you searching in that time? Do you remember back to that time? Were you seeking information at that time and looking to find, are there people who feel this way?
Yeah, I was not so much searching for people who are this way, because there was really, as you point out, there was no way to do that. I
Mm,
was more trying to figure out if I could find some way to justify what was going on. Because my initial reaction was, well, they're only animals, which is the reaction of most people.
mhm.
So, we shouldn't be concerned. But but then, we use that frequently to dismiss atrocities committed against other people because they're not our neighbors. If they're half a globe away, it's okay to to bomb them and murder them. Like, we don't we're not particularly concerned about the genocide going on in Gaza, for example, even though they're people, but
Mhm.
because they're far away, we have our our measures of moral acceptability vary a great deal through a number of factors. That's actually another subject I deal with in my book, which is how we value lives, which is kind of an interesting subject we can get into if you want to.
Yeah, yeah. I would like to get into that. I also just have a question about, sort of swinging back to my earlier question of why were you able to, you know, go. I mean, you obviously spent a few months, seeing, can I justify this? But it doesn't sound like you had a initial gut reaction almost like violent opposition to the idea that something is wrong here. And I'm wondering if it was the shock value for you. And I'll just share from my personal experience that what turned me vegan was watching Earthlings. And by the way, and I know you know this, like that beautiful quote from Isaac Bashevis Singer is quoted very early on in that film during this 15-minute dialogue that's discussing the Holocaust and slavery, and mentioning that there's this other thing that we're all basically taking part in right now. And I was very sensitive to that knowledge. You know, yeah. So, but for me, it was the shock. You know, it was this comparison, and then it was also seeing just the sheer brutality. And I'm wondering if it was because you were confronted with literal body parts right in front of you when you turn that corner.
Well, that was kind of a graphic reminder of what we were doing, and a graphic reminder of the similarities with what the Nazis did to us.
Yeah.
So it was a powerful motivator to come up with some justifications. It was a little bit like being like walking into an insane asylum. You know, like figuring out you were totally out of touch with everybody else. You know.
Yeah. Yeah. And this was was this in the 70s?
72, yeah.
In 72. Wow. You know, I just had, and this interview hasn't been released. I don't know when the order of these, so I may be spoiling, but I'll say I just had a conversation with Richard D. Ryder. That was also just such a joy to be able to speak with someone with such a rich history in the movement. And he was describing all this stuff happening in the 60s, and basically like when he came up with the term for speciesism, it was 1970. And just for a little like context, I was born in 84. All of this stuff happened so long before I was even born. And I've been saying this on my podcast a lot, just how amazing it is to be learning about how much stuff was happening before I was born. But what I really tried to do with Richard was to convey to my audience something that I didn't experience, but I imagine must have been experienced. Whereas like when I got into the movement, there was a movement, you know, like when it happened for you, when you started to grapple with these things, when Richard started to grapple with these things, it was like there wasn't really a foundation. And so you guys really had to kind of lead the way, pioneer.
No friends.
No friends, a lonely existence. And you, as you mentioned, I mean, even today, yeah, people get ridiculed for being vegan, and so I can only imagine how bad it was.
Well, no, it's it's different. It's different. Here's how it's different. If you were a vegetarian back then, first of all, the word vegan didn't exist as in America. It existed in England, obviously, but since well, whenever 40, 46, 47, whenever Watson came up with it. But it didn't exist in the United States. There was a vegan society that was formed in 1960, but their reach was restricted to members of their family, basically, and their friends.
Right.
So yeah, nobody had heard the word vegan. No, the vegetarian. If you're a vegetarian, which I was in fact, but I didn't know it at the time. The reason I didn't share was not because I felt that somebody would disagree with me, but because I would be considered weird. It was like, I don't know, it's like somebody praying to Zeus or embracing trees, or I don't know, would be totally weird. Somebody, including to myself, I thought I was weird, because back then I thought that eating animal flesh was essential to my survival. I was hoping, and I had a PhD in chemistry back then. Remember, I had read. I was an informed person,
Yeah.
and I speculated that although I needed animal flesh for my survival, I speculated that I wouldn't just drop dead. That I speculated that I would probably get sick and weak and undernourished, and then I would grab a bite of hamburger until I got well, and then continue being
Being
the
vegetarian until you got sick again.
de
Right.
facto vegetarian. It wasn't until 1971, the publication of Diet for a Small Planet by Frances Moore-Lappé, that she's the one that first gave us permission to live without the animal flesh by using complementary proteins. I don't know if you remember, that was before you were born. And I religiously then continued for the next few years eating complementary proteins, rice and beans, to fulfill that requirement, until it was, of course, disavowed later on. But so that was okay. I'm losing my train of thought here. So that was the problem then. Today it's different. Today there is nobody who doesn't understand that you can have a good life, healthy life without eating animal flesh, and B, that there are a large number of people who in fact do not partake of animal flesh or milk.
Right.
The problem is not that they are weird. The problem is that they may be tempted to make you do that.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And that you would then have to figure out some good reasons not to, because you really don't want to change.
Right. Yeah, that's very true.
Imagine if there was a movement of gluten-free people who were going around trying to get everybody to stop eating wheat, and you loved your bread, you don't want to argue, you don't want to look up the internet, you don't want to deal with the issue. You're totally happy eating bread.
Yeah.
You don't want somebody to come and try to convince you not to stop eating bread.
Yeah. Well, it must be interesting. I'm sure you learned this decades ago, but it's just so appropriate. I feel like that I've got these interviews back to back, because Richard described the exact same feelings of, am I crazy? Am I weird for thinking like this? What is it about me? Why am I more concerned about, the animals in the laboratories that I'm seeing? And it wasn't until he started to write op-eds in a newspaper and started to get feedback that he realized, I'm not alone. Actually, there are people who are concerned about this. Where was that moment for you? I mean, I know I'm kind of jumping ahead because we sort of, well, I guess no, we didn't. We sort of got to the point where you kind of realized, like, I can actually not consume meat. But where was that moment for you when you realized, oh, there's a lot of people actually that kind of feel the same way as I do about, well, maybe it was the quote from Isaac Bashevis Singer that you already brought up.
No, the quote from Isaac Bashevis Singer told me that I was not the only person in the world.
In the whole universe, right? Yeah.
There was one other person.
Just one.
So, and the fact that he was a landsman, and that just helped. No, my turning point, my life-changing experience came 3 years later, in 1975, at the World Vegetarian Congress in Orono, Maine.
Yeah,
there were. That was kind of a strange experience. So After 1972, and after reading Isaac Bashevis Singer short stories, and deciding that I was not the only one, and that I would have to spend the rest of my life living in a society of animal killers, I figured, okay, the only way I can make my peace with that is by vowing to devote the rest of my life to fighting all oppression, beginning with the oppression of animals for food. But I had no means of doing that. I was still all alone, and it felt weird. I had this awareness, but I had to keep it to myself. It was I sometimes use the analogy. I felt the way that decent Germans must have felt during the Holocaust, where they kind of felt terrible about what was going on, but they didn't have any way of doing anything about it.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the spring of 1975, somebody handed me a leaflet. I was at some kind of a picnic or something. Somebody handed me a leaflet announcing the World Vegetarian Congress coming up in August in Orono, Maine. And I thought to myself, World Vegetarian, you mean there are other vegetarians in the world? And they meet in the Congress, and there'll be a lot of them. And what happens if I go there? What if I don't like them? Or what if they don't like me?
Mm.
Can I still be a vegetarian? I mean, it sounds silly, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But
Understandable.
back then, I had never met any other vegetarians.
Mm.
So but then I also realized that this may be my only opportunity to fulfill my pledge to spend the rest of my life fighting the oppression of animals for food.
Mm-hmm.
So I went, and I still tear up thinking about it. There were hundreds of people with different dress, different age, different gender, different economic station, different language, different religion. And the only thing we all had in common is we didn't eat animals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
These were my people. They welcomed me with open arms, and I finally, for the first time in my life, I felt that I was at home,
Right.
that I belonged. It was the first time I belonged since I separated from my mother many years before then. That I belonged somewhere,
Wow.
that I wasn't an outcast,
Wow. It's amazing.
and I became active immediately after that.
Well, isn't that such a powerful comment on how just like one little thread of commonality can bind people together? Like you mentioned, everybody was so different, whether, just based on race, religion, gender, everything. There were a lot of differences between you, but obviously there was something that bound you together. It was your, not eating animals. And then obviously, you guys, as we know, as animal activists, we know that we have a lot of similarities with each other beyond that too, just in our ability to feel, to suffer, that sort of thing, that we deal with, as activists, and it's stressing to the public. But yeah, what a powerful moment. Are some of the people that you met at that first conference, were those some of the people that you would go on to work with over the years?
Yeah, well, so the organizers immediately recognized my abilities and my enthusiasm, and they signed me up to work with them. And I also met a young woman named Nellie Shriver, who was already back then recognized as a animal activist, and she became my coach, my life coach, my my activism coach. So I worked with her for a year. And then by 1976, I felt I was able to strike out on my own.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
founded the Vegetarian Information Service, which published a lot of handouts on vegetarianism. Being in Washington also and having the PhD next to my name allowed me to testify before a number of government committees on health and nutrition, that sort of thing. Most famously, the Senate Select Committee on Nutrition and Human Needs, which issued the dietary goals for America, saying that Americans should eat more vegetables and less meat.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
In
Well,
1977.
it's striking to me how, you know, the animal rights movement has, I guess, maybe more so now, though, like you see more older people in it, but it has skewed young in the past and maybe had this reputation as being anti-intellectual or like, of course, anti-science when it came to like vivisection. And I'm very much learning that it's quite the opposite, that the early people in the animal rights movement and the modern animal rights movement were often, very highly educated people, very intellectual people, whether they were philosophers like Peter Singer or psychologists like Richard Ryder or chemists, and just incredible, like wealth of knowledge and skill set to bring to the movement. And I think that's an interesting thing. But now, as I'm saying that, I'm thinking of all the incredible doctors that are a part of our movement, like Neil Barnard and all these incredible people who are impressive. And I'm sort of rethinking what I just said. Like, there are tons of intellectuals in our movement, but maybe it's that the public doesn't always see that, and they see the young activist, who's, by the way, and I'm not throwing any shade on it, they're equally impressive in my view, with that fire and the passion. Yeah. But that's something that I've noticed about the time before I was born is just how much incredible amount of thought was going into things, and how well thought out this was. Tell me a little bit about Farm, because you started, the Farm group that has been going for at least 50 years now, and still going strong today. And I remember you described in the emails that we sent back and forth that, one of the struggles that you had early on was to get the movement to recognize farm animals because it was so focused on vivisection at the very beginning. Take me back to that time period, if you could.
Sure. So just a quick history of the movement. So, in fact, it's interesting you should bring that up, because I just completed doing a documentary on the birth of the animal rights movement in the United States. It's called 5 Decades, One Mission. And it's a series of 6 videos that contain the presentations by 10 presenters who were either the protagonists in the birth of the movement or came shortly thereafter, and they recount the early campaigns, the early things that brought the individual activists into a movement, such as conferences, books, magazines. They talk about the 8 of the key pioneers who are no longer with us. And the last video deals with the accomplishments of the movement and future projections. And I will give you the website for that that you can put in your in the website, in the links. But it's 5decades.org.
5decades.org. Okay.
And it was just today is actually the launch date for it, coincidentally.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
I can,
it was spent 6 months compiling it and editing it and so forth.
wow. Then in that case, what I'll probably do is rush this interview out so that it can kind of coincide with that. Um, yeah.
But
Sorry. Go
anyway,
ahead. Yeah.
in a nutshell, so what happened is, boy, how far back? And do you want to get into the whole history of the movement or just the United States?
That's totally up to you. I can go all day. Some of my interviews have gone over 3 hours.
Okay,
So,
well, okay. So, okay, you can always cut this out. But basically, animals have been exploited by humans since time immemorial.
right.
And the reason, one reason, not a justification, but one reason for that is that animals have played a vital role in our own survival. Beginning with animal sacrifices that were used to appease a forever angry god who was responsible for thunderstorms, for flooding, for fires, and so forth that destroyed crops and had to be appeased by sacrifices. And of course, animal sacrifices, beginning with Abraham, were much more convenient than human sacrifices. So, but then it continued with using animals for food. It continued with using animal skins for clothing and tents, shelters, and using animals for warfare and entertainment and communication and hard labor and eventually animal research. So, but then as technology evolved and technological breakthrough happened, uh, some of the technological breakthroughs made the use of animals unnecessary. So, for example, the invention of the telegraph meant that we no longer needed to capture and imprison hundreds of thousands of pigeons for transmitting our messages. The invention of the steam engine meant that we no longer needed to use horses for long distance transport. Invention of the diesel and internal combustion engine meant we no longer needed to use mules for agricultural labor and horses for urban transportation. The invention of artificial fibers meant that we no longer needed to use animals for clothing. And the invention of the television and other spectacles meant that we no longer had to rely on circuses using animals and animal fighting spectacles and rodeos and that sort of thing. So technology has the development of technology has freed millions and millions of animals from oppression by humans, with one exception: the use of animals for food. Technology has increased the use of animals for food. Beginning in the 1950s, the invention of antibiotics, when somebody got the bright idea that if we fed antibiotics to animals, we could then crowd them and have them use less space and therefore make raising animals for food more economically profitable. And that gave birth to the infamous factory farming.
Right.
And then the invention of bigger and more powerful trawlers meant that you could now scoop all living organisms in a given stretch of the ocean without doing individual fishing. And you could then use organisms that you caught that were not fit for human consumption, you could then use those to feed to other so-called farmed fish.
Right, right.
So there was an onset of fish farming. So in that respect, the technology was not a friend of animals used for food, which represent 99% of all animals. So that's sort of the 5-minute version of the impact of technology.
Mm-hmm.
But there were also philosophical thoughts about animals, so the absence thereof. So we very often quote Pythagoras because he advocated against the use of animals for food. In fact, the term vegetarianism is fairly recent. I don't know exactly who came up with it or when. But when I was young, which was in the 30s and 40s, the not eating meat was referred to as the Pythagorean diet, not vegetarianism.
Something, by the way, something I learned from your blog, and I just want to quickly note, I'm glad that we're going through this, but I am going to link to your blog because I want to give people the same resources that you gave me, which were plentiful. But yeah, please continue this. It's so fascinating hearing about this. So we had the Pythagorean diet, which is something that I learned from your blog just in the past few days.
Unfortunately, one of the more prominent pupils of Pythagoras was a man named Aristotle, another famous Greek philosopher, and he basically felt the opposite. He felt that animals are basically put on earth to serve humans and that they did not have any natural feelings, that they had made basically automatic reactions to pain, so to speak, and that they did not deserve any consideration of their interests. And that view was then popularized by Paul, the apostle, who was the founder of the Christian faith, who was very much enamored of Pythagoras and his teachings. And then it was confirmed by Thomas Aquinas, another famous Catholic theologian in the 13th century, and then by René Descartes, a French philosopher and scientist in the 17th century. And even though technology was gradually and only very recently, mind you, all these technological inventions and discoveries I cited were basically part of the Renaissance. They're part of the basically 18th, 19th century. So anything before then, there was no redeeming activities of any kind for animals between Aristotle, which was the 4th century before the Common Era, and the 17th centuries that followed. For about 20 centuries, there was no consideration, no technological discoveries, no nothing to help animals. So the first voice that was raised was in 1789 by a British social innovator named
Bentham, right?
Yeah, Jeremy Bentham. Thank you.
Right.
My memory fails me at times.
He's easy since I share his name, Jeremy. So for me,
yeah, Jeremy Bentham, who issued a thesis on the treatment of animals and concluded famously by saying the question is not can they reason or can they talk, but can they suffer?
Right.
Now, it's not like Bentham invented animal suffering. Anybody who had worked with animals until that point and afterwards knew damn well that animals could suffer. the difference of having this stated by a highly regarded, famous British social innovator, influencer, was the fact that the suffering mattered.
Yeah, because of who said it. Right.
Because of who said it.
Yeah.
And that had a huge impact on British society and eventually led to the founding of the world's first animal protection organization, the Royal Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. But even then, it applied only to cruelty in the public eye. So it was that their suffering mattered, but it didn't matter to the animals. It mattered to the people watching the animals suffer.
Right.
So it was okay to continue to do vivisection. It was okay to use animals for food. It was okay to hunt, as long as you didn't do that in public view.
Wow. Yeah. It's pretty similar to today as well. I'll note a similarity. Yeah.
So that continued for another 100 years until toward the end of the 18th century. Sorry, I got my dates. 19th century, the late 1800s, when another British social mover and shaker named Henry Salt came up with the concept of animal rights. And the difference was that he went back to the suffering and said, okay, so we all recognize that animals can suffer. And so just like people can suffer. And when people suffer, we recognize that they have certain interests in not suffering.
Right.
And in order to protect those interests in not suffering, we have come up with the concept of animal rights, of human rights. Human rights are basically the rights of humans not to suffer, if you look at the fundamental concept.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if we recognize that humans can suffer and that they have interests in not suffering, and that we can protect those interests by establishing human rights, by extension, if we recognize that animals can suffer, and therefore animals have certain interests in not suffering, then we should recognize animal rights to protect those interests. It's an interesting concept. Mm-hmm. And animal rights are very simple. Human rights got very complicated. It's about voting and about all kinds of complex slavery and so forth. But animals are not that complicated. They just want to not to be killed and to be left alone.
Right.
That's all animals want.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's just their freedom of their right to their own bodily autonomy, their right to not have humans interfering, I guess.
Yeah. So that noble concept, again, nobody would touch it because it was too far ahead of where the common moral development of humanity was back in the late 1800s.
Yeah.
So that rested for another 70 years. And then something interesting happened, but not in England. In the United States, in the 1960s, there was a civil rights movement.
Right.
There was a Martin Luther King and a famous speech and there was the march from Selma and the beating of the demonstrators, and resulted in the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights of 1965. And that, almost everything that happens in America has a huge impact on the rest of the Western world, and so did that civil rights movement. And one of the people who was impressed was a young lady whose name I'm blocking again.
Oh, now this one I don't know. You may
Okay.
have to find it, but
Okay,
yeah.
Bridget
Oh,
somebody.
Brophy, right?
Brophy,
Yeah,
thank you.
yeah, that's it. That's it.
Bridget Brophy.
Yeah.
And in 1965, she wrote a very long editorial in the London Sunday Times, which was a huge newspaper. It was much big. It was like the New York Times and Washington Post combined. It was
Wow.
respected throughout the world. And it was entitled The Rights of Animals, appropriately. And it basically said, look, there's this huge revolution taking place in America. Shouldn't we take another look at what Henry Salt proposed 70 years ago? And so forth, and went into a bunch of details. And that lay dormant for only about 5 years this time. And then it was picked up by a group of young philosophers at Oxford University, of whom your friend Richard Ryder was one.
Exactly. Yeah.
Who coined the concept of speciesism as discrimination against one group of living beings. And there were others, and another member of that group was a young philosopher named Peter Singer. And three members of the group wrote a book called Animals, Men, and Morals. And it was not really a book. It was a collection of 13 essays by people like Bridget Brophy and others who had expressed some interest in animal rights. It was basically a philosophical concept. Nobody expected any changes on the ground. It was just something that philosophers like to think about. And the book got stirred very little interest. And Peter Singer, who had just been made aware of that maybe some concern about raising animals for food, because he read a book about called Animal Machines that was very critical of the English factory farms. And he kind of got the idea, as philosophers do, that maybe it's wrong to mistreat animals. And he became intrigued by the concept of animal rights in the book, Animals, Men, and Morals. And he wondered why it got so little interest. So he said, well, maybe you should try a different territory. Maybe it'll be different in the United States. So he wrote a very extensive review of the book for the New York Review of Books, which back then was the place where every intellectual read, and it was still before the internet. And the review got very favorable reviews.
The review got reviews. Yeah.
And Peter got a bunch of letters, and coincidentally, one of the people who was interested in the review was the New York University, and they said, we really liked what you said in the review. How would you like to teach a course on animal rights at the New York University. So that's how Peter moved to New York, and he figured, well, maybe he can stir some interest in the book Animals, Men, and Morals in the United States. And again, because of the favorable reaction to the review, he decided to transform the notes for his course into a book, which became known as Animal Liberation and was published in 1975.
Mm-hmm.
That book made a kind of a splash in academia among philosophers, but in a strange way, it wasn't really a philosophical book. It was more of a social change book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It wasn't really what philosophers would consider worthy of a philosophical dissertation.
Mm.
But eventually it did, because Peter ended up writing many more books, and eventually became recognized as a very distinguished philosopher. But initially, the people were kind of skeptical about the book. But the book had an important impact on about 20 individuals who felt badly about vivisection. And they were always looking for a reason why they should oppose vivisection. It was difficult for them to just walk up to the university and say, you should stop animal experiments because we think it's wrong or something. So now they had a book that, they had some intellectual backing for their views. And just like I had gotten this backing from Isaac Bashevis Singer for my unorthodox views on eating animals, they got the backing of Animal Liberation for their views that people shouldn't do animal experiments, vivisection.
Mm-hmm.
So there were about 20 of those people doing different things, including the fellow that you were interested in, Henry Spira.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Later that year, a group of the American Vegan Society was also the head of the American Vegan Society, named Jay Dinshaw, was also very active in the International Vegetarian Congress group. And he was attending the biennial congresses, and a couple of those, they said, hey, isn't it time to have a World Congress in America? And others said, no, America, you're kidding. That's beef country. No, that's ridiculous. No, there's not even a vegetarian organization in America.
Right.
How are you going to do a Congress there? Well, Jay Dinshaw was not to be deterred. He said, okay, there's no organization, I'll form one.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And he formed the North American Vegetarian Society in 1974. And he said, okay, now we have a vegetarian society. Now will you let us have a Congress here?
Let me pause you for a second just to give you a rest, because you've answered a few of my questions that I was going to ask. One was just about Jay Dinshaw, because when you pointed me to your blog, one of the things that I really appreciated was how you and I seem to have some of the same goals, which was to, kind of shine a light on people who may have been overlooked in our movement. And you had specifically mentioned Jay Dinshaw as someone that a lot of people in America don't understand how influential he was. And you're right, because I had never heard of him before. And so I would love to kind of get a perspective on him. I also want to kind of swing back to animal liberation before you continue, because in talking with Richard Ryder, I was learning, and I think I actually got a fact wrong. So I was under the impression that it was his book Victims of Science that was reviewed by Peter Singer, and I mentioned that to Richard. I think he had kind of a puzzled look on his face, and so maybe I had gotten a fact wrong, and that's why he was confused. So I thought that was the review that led to Animal Liberation. Another interesting note, historical side note about that, was that Peter had reached out to Richard because he was interested in that concept of speciesism, which he, popularized in Animal Liberation. He actually asked Richard to co-author the book with him. And Richard, at the time was involved in campaigns and said no. And then, it's kind of interesting history that Animal Liberation went on to be so popular and famous in the movement. So yeah, that was just an interesting tidbit. But I thought I'd give you a little rest since you were going for so long. But yeah, if you could, before you continue on, just maybe a little impression about Jay, since I didn't know who he was, and I'm guessing most of my listeners probably don't know who he was.
Right. Well, there is a pretty extensive interview with his wife in the documentary that I mentioned earlier.
Oh, interesting. Perfect.
He was ahead of his times. What can I say? Mm-hmm. He was very impressed by the British Vegan Society and the authors that wrote about veganism in the 50s. And in 1960, he founded the American Vegan Society, which was basically him, his wife, and a couple of his brothers. And I think he realized at that point that veganism didn't have a chance. And so he pretty much decided to devote most of his energies to promoting vegetarianism. Mm. And he felt that the best way to do that would be by bringing the World Vegetarian Congress to the United States. And the United States had maybe half a dozen vegetarian societies in major cities like New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles. But they were kind of, they were maybe Seventh-day Adventists or maybe affiliates of some religion. They were not what today you would think of as vegetarian societies. They were mostly older people, and they didn't do much. They were just paying dues, basically.
I see.
So following the World Vegetarian Congress, that led to the formation of about 60 local vegetarian societies. And they were very different societies. They were now activist societies. They were talking to the media about vegetarianism. They would appear on television, do interviews. They would do advocacy. It was a very different atmosphere. But they were totally involved with not eating animals. They had nothing to do with vivisection. And the followers of Peter Singer's Animal Liberation were totally about vivisection. Now, if you pressed them, they probably didn't eat animals. They were probably vegans, but that was kind of incidental. That was just so people wouldn't embarrass them by saying, you oppose vivisection, but you're okay to eat them. So they became vegans kind of by default, but they were not into advocacy of veganism because farm animals were considered untouchable back in the 70s and 80s. There was an impossible task. Everybody was eating animals. You could convince somebody not to experiment on animals, because, okay, they could experiment on something else. But you can't stop people from eating animals. That was the general idea. So there were the vegetarians doing the vegetarian thing, and there were the animal rights people doing their vivisection thing.
Mm-hmm.
About 20 of them. Maybe a dozen more active and 8 little less active. So I was kind of caught in between. I had not, I had not read Peter Singer's book,
Mm-hmm.
not to this day. But I did meet some of his followers, like Henry Spira, Alex Pacheco, Jim Mason, and others, and I really liked them. I really valued what they were doing. I admired what they were doing, even though they were dealing with vivisection, which I kind of felt about vivisection the way they felt about veganism. I
Mm-hmm.
felt it was wrong, but 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 not that important.
Yeah, you were looking at a different scale, basically.
Yeah.
Right.
So, but I liked them, and I liked their enthusiasm, and I liked their energy, and I really wanted to follow in their footsteps. And by now, so now we're talking 1980s. Now it's 5 years later,
Mm-hmm.
and the vegetarian thing kind of mellowed down. The activism kind of simmered down, and they were no longer talking to the media. They were mostly doing picnics and vegetarian Thanksgiving.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Potluck
they
stuff.
became social clubs basically
Right.
for fellow vegetarians, and the anti-vivisection people were all out there campaigning for animal rights, and they wanted to go out and do things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I said, okay, we have all this power of these 60 vegetarian societies. They had the money, they had the people, the hundreds of people, and we have this energy and enthusiasm of these 20 animal activists.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, there's no ideological disagreement. I mean, the vegetarians certainly didn't approve of vivisection, and the anti-vivisectionists certainly didn't approve of eating animals. Why don't we bring these people together and see what happens? We have the resources and the numbers here, and we have the energy and the enthusiasm here. Bring them together, see what happens. And that's what I did in 1981 at Allentown, Pennsylvania, at the Action for Life conference. And basically, the animal rights people just took over, and I became myself a vegan and animal rights person.
That's amazing. I just want to personally note that what you're describing, um, this sort of differences in philosophies, different theories of change, different priorities. We should go after this group of animals and try to free them instead of this for right now. Is something that's still happening today. I'm sure you're aware of that, and not
Yes,
to
very much.
yeah, and not to put myself up on your level, but I just had a very recent experience of doing the exact same thing where I had kind of seen this, group of basically what I noticed is this group is getting things done. This group is getting things done. They're not talking. They're not necessarily friends. And it was basically 3 groups that I saw. These are the people getting things done. I had an opportunity that presented itself to me to get them in the same room together. We got them in the same room together during a summit, coincidentally in Washington, D.C., very recently. And it was beautiful. And I think this is just, it's amazing that this is happening in 1981. We have all these lessons where we can just get people in the same room sometimes. Doesn't mean we all have to agree on something, but there's something to be said for solidarity. And also, I was watching an interview on Animal Activism Collective's channel recently with someone who is very involved in welfare campaigns, but talking about how they would join, each other's campaigns just out of solidarity. Even they wouldn't necessarily feel like the most passionate about this campaign or that campaign, but we do that a lot now. And I'm loving that about this movement. I'm seeing that happening more where, maybe I'm not as passionate about this campaign as I am about that campaign, but because I like you, this person, and I respect you, I will join you on your campaign. And I think it's working. Like, things are getting done. There's a lot of things happening. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that in there just to make myself feel important,
Yeah, that's good. It's good.
Yeah, but it's amazing that this was happening in 1981. But you described to me that you struggled like over the years, basically in terms of just keeping the movement together. You said like a lot of times you'd be organizing for some conference, and a lot of your efforts went into just holding everybody together because boy, do we get into some fights. I mean, we're a passionate bunch, huh? But yeah, tell me a little bit about that, because that seems to have been a lot of your time and effort is just holding the glue together, like holding it together.
Right. Well, so the conference of 1981, that Action for Life conference, I did 7 more of those in subsequent years. And then there was a group in Washington that was doing seminars for legislative work. They were basically teaching people how to do lobbying in Congress. And that grew and grew. And eventually it became pretty big, and it started getting bigger than my Action for Life conferences. So by 1987, I said, there's no point my struggling and competing with these people. Let's join forces, and I'll just work with them. Mm-hmm. And so between 1988, 87, 88, and 1996, roughly, for the next 10 years or so, they did the conferences, and it was called the League for Animal Legislation or something like that. And one of their most famous activities was the March on Washington in 1990. Mm-hmm. And the person who led it was actually a former employee of mine who I had a disagreement with, and he left and started running this other group. So the 1990 March was very successful, and so he decided to do another one in 1995. And that timing didn't work out, so he postponed it to 1996. And because there was split in the movement, mostly by author who was very prominent back then named Gary Francione, mm-hmm. who argued against the march. He thought it was a waste of time. The march was not very successful. Where the first march got about 20,000 people, the second march got maybe 3,000 people. And by then, I had reconciled with my former employee who didn't like me, and we became good friends. And this was before email. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And he went on vacation after that march. He knew that people would be disappointed because a number of organizations had printed, 20,000 brochures that were, all their printed materials would be useless after the event. And they also donated a lot of money to make this happen. So he knew there would be a lot of disappointment. but he came back and he's found a bunch of letters on his desk, and
Mm.
and, and apparently I haven't seen the letters, but apparently they were not very kind.
Yeah.
And then
Right.
he became very depressed, and he threatened to leave. And I said, his name was Peter Gerard.
Mm.
And I said, Peter, you can't, people are depending on your conferences. It's okay. So the march didn't go well, but you should still do the conference, because there's no conference and a bad march, and people will think that the movement has disappeared.
Hmm.
You can't let those two things happen in quick succession.
Hmm.
Bad march and no conference. And he said, well, I'll let you know by Christmas. So he called me just before Christmas and he said, I'm leaving. I'm not only leaving the organization and the conference, I'm disappearing. You cannot, I'm not, you cannot get in touch with me.
Wow.
And I'm totally disappearing from public knowledge. And I was left with this situation of bad March and no conference
Mm.
in 1997. So I said, well, I used to do those Action for Life conferences in the 1980s. I should be able to do this one. In fact, I'm the only one who has the experience in putting together a conference.
Hmm.
So I did the conference in 1997, and it became the first uh, National Animal Rights Conference. And then I was hoping that somebody else would step in and do one in 98 and 99. Nobody did.
Mm.
And then you were probably too young, but in 2000 was a crazy year.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Right.
All the computers were supposed to stop working,
That's right. They were. I do remember that. Yeah.
and all kinds of horrible things plagues and other horrible things were supposed to happen in the year 2000. And
Yeah.
I said to myself, okay, if we don't do a conference in the year 2000, we're doomed.
Yeah. Everything's
There's,
falling apart.
there's no movement anymore.
Yeah.
So I did one in 2000 and then just kept doing them every year since then.
Wow. That's amazing. So, I mean, you felt the weight of responsibility to hold the movement together. You were worried about the movement completely fizzling
Yeah.
out. Um,
Yeah.
uh,
So the thing, so you were talking about factions. Yes, we had different factions, and the reason that I was able to hold them together is because they had no other options.
mm, mm,
So it's not like somebody could leave our conference and go somewhere else. There was no somewhere else.
right. Yeah.
So they had to, even if they didn't like me or they didn't like the conference or they didn't like their goodies, their rewards in the conference, they had no other options. They had to figure out a way to stick with the conference. And I, of course, did my darndest to try to accommodate them, their needs and their desires.
Yeah. Which I can only imagine just based on the little organizing that I've done is exhausting. It requires a ton of personal contacts, phone calls. I can only imagine how much pressure you were under. So thank you for going through that and holding our movement together and taking that weight of responsibility on. And I have found too that a lot of people are thrust into organizing roles, and that's because nobody else is doing it. And so then you have to do it unless you want things, as you mentioned, to fizzle out. Um, yeah. Well, I mean, all the while, you're running farm as well. You had started farm, and I sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, farm basically happened at the 1981 conference, just like a number of organizations were formed at uh, that founding 1981 conference. Well, for example, take PIRA. So PIRA was a student organization formed by Alex Pacheco at George Washington University in 1980. And the reason he enrolled in George Washington University, well, there were two reasons. One was that his parents wanted him to get an education. His father was a physician. And the other was that he wanted to use the university's facilities and student funding to start this little organization called People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, which was a local student group. And so not sure where I was going with this. Lost my train of thought.
Well, just to take you back, you were talking about Alex Pacheco starting PETA and why he went to
isn't it? Okay. Yeah, so sure. So we became very close friends and confidants, I don't know whether our common name had anything to do with it, but he was also a neighbor. They were living near me. So we saw each other several times a week. And eventually, and he decided to volunteer at this Institute for Biomedical Research in Silver Spring, where they were doing experiments on macaque monkeys. And he documented all of the atrocities that were being conducted there. And he had a key to the place. So at night he was able to bring in veterinarians and media to take photographs and get extensive documentation on all the atrocities. And then so he came to the conference. He and his partner then Ingrid Newkirk, who joined him shortly after that. So they both came to the conference, and at the conference, he ran into Cleveland Amory, who was a huge media mogul who had a weakness for animals. He loved animals. I can talk for an hour about Cleveland Amory. He was one of my heroes. But he was also huge media. He was on the back page of TV Guide every week, and TV Guide was in every American TV home because it's the only way you knew what was going to be showing on your TV.
Yeah,
was by consulting the TV Guide.
Yeah.
And every time you picked up the TV Guide, you saw the name of
Cleveland.
His name, Cleveland Amory, on the back page. So he had huge influence in the media world. He basically he had huge power, and he was willing to use that power to help animals. And when I hooked him up with Alex, and Alex showed him the videos and the photographs of those atrocities, and Cleveland basically turned it into a media expose, and it became huge. And it basically elevated both this little student organization called PETA and the whole animal rights concept into the public consciousness, which Peter Singer was never able to do with his book.
Yeah. I had Ingrid on very recently, and she also cites Peter Singer's book. So while Peter Singer didn't, maybe his book didn't directly, it definitely channeled through and influenced a lot of people.
It affected about 20 people very deeply.
Mm.
And those 20 people then became very influential in the movement.
That's an important point because especially telling for someone like me who's doing a fairly small podcast, like I was telling you before we got started, this podcast doesn't reach a ton of people, unfortunately. But as I was describing, I feel that it reaches a highly motivated group of people. And you're describing 20 people being affected by animal liberation who went on to do many
20
things.
people being affected to the point
Of
of
yeah,
changing their lives.
right, right. Yeah, I don't mean to dismiss
I'm,
it and
I'm
say there weren't
sure
more people.
I'm sure many more people were intellectually affected.
For sure. For sure. In fact, I know someone personally who I've met locally who went vegan because of animal liberation, even a newer activist. So even still has impact to this day and continues to as with the reissue.
Okay. Okay, I should correct it. I'm talking about 1980.
Oh yeah, for sure, for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah,
Since then, yeah.
right, right. Um, yeah, yeah, and yeah, PETA's influence was just massive. I had told you also that one of the things I wanted to do, and this is one of the things I didn't really get a chance. I had intended to with Richard, um, was just to ask him about a few of these figures who loom really large. People like Tom Reagan. You mentioned Henry Spira, Jay. You told me about a little bit about Cleveland. You say you could talk about. I don't want to go too long. I know there's a limit to people's attention spans. We're already over 2 hours, but I wonder if you could talk about some of these people and just bring them to life in a way that because I was unfortunately too late to have met some of these people like Tom Reagan and Reagan. You know, uh, it looms large for me for another reason is just that because he was in North Carolina State University doing his great work. And I grew up in that area. I was born in Durham. And so I was raised in that area where North Carolina State was very nearby. But yeah, if you could, and by the way, I don't mean to hold you here forever. So if you like Jeremy, I could go on forever and it's enough already. But so stop me if you want to. But I'd love to hear a little bit about some of these folks.
Sure. So, again, I think I will just send you a complimentary copy of the documentary
Yeah, yeah.
because it deals with a lot of the topics we've been talking about,
Hmm.
and you will hear it from the first witnesses, from the people who were actually there at the time.
Hmm.
Uh, so Henry Spira. So Henry Spira. Remember, I told you that Peter Singer taught a course at New York University in the early 1970s, 73, and most of them were little old ladies,
Hmm.
except for Henry Spira.
Hmm.
I think he was the only man in the class,
Interesting.
and and the legend goes. So Henry Spira's background was mostly in the labor movement. He was a union organizer and he was in the merchant marine,
Mm.
and he was always working on behalf of the oppressed. and and he this is unconfirmed, but I heard it somewhere
Mm.
that he saw a mention of Peter Singer's review in one of his labor magazines where this prominent labor leader was ridiculing Peter Singer,
Hmm.
that he's concerned about animals when there are so many workers that are overworked and underpaid. And and Henry said, "Well, that's true, but animals matter too." And he was kind of upset that this labor leader was dismissing Peter Singer. So
Hmm.
he decided he was kind of a spiteful person in a good way. In a good
Yeah,
way.
great.
And he said, "Okay, I'll show this labor leader. I'm actually going to enroll in Peter Singer's course."
Nice.
And
Which was supposed to be just for little women. I'm sure Peter was upset about it. Yeah,
and
joking.
and then once he was in the course, he really got it, and he said,
Right.
"Yeah, I really want this. Yeah, animals are abused. Yes, animals have interests. Yes, animals should have rights. Yeah, all of the above." And he decided to start doing things,
Mhm.
and that's how he basically looked it up, and he found that there were these cat blinding experiments going on at the American Museum of Natural History in New York, just a few blocks from where Henry was living.
Mhm.
And he just decided to gather a bunch of people, make a bunch of signs, and started demonstrating. And because most people had such benign views of the American Museum of Natural History, and the cat experiments were so bizarre and so useless. Who
Mhm.
cares about the sexual life of cats? I
Right.
mean, whether they can do it blindly or with the sense of smell or whatever.
Mhm.
The contrast was such that the museum just found it impossible to continue. I mean, it just was a real stain on their good name
Mm.
of the museum. And then he went on to work on rabbit blinding experiments by cosmetic companies like Revlon.
Mhm.
And he basically took out ads in the New York Times showing the rabbit and asking in big letters, "How many rabbits have you blinded for beauty's sake, Revlon?"
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
Revlon didn't need that kind of publicity because
Yeah, I think I even heard of that. Yeah.
they were so dependent on goodwill of women, especially who were particularly sensitive to any cruelties.
Right,
So
right.
yeah, so he got it. So and then I met Henry at that first Action for Life conference,
Mhm.
where basically everybody was there.
Mhm.
Everybody who was anybody was
Mhm.
there, uh, and uh, and Henry didn't like anybody. He was not a people person,
Mm.
and he didn't like me either.
Really?
Well, he didn't like anybody, so I didn't feel
You didn't feel personally attacked by
personally
that.
attacked.
Yeah. Yeah.
And but I recognized immediately his power,
Mm.
and back then I was basically the only leader working with farm animals back then,
Mhm.
and I was desperately looking for allies. And I saw a powerful ally in Henry Spira. He had done those two campaigns back then by 1981.
Mm.
And I said, what if I could turn Henry Spira over to farm animals?
Mhm.
What a victory that would be. so so Henry Spira was very fond in his pronouncements. He would refer to vivisection as the universe of pain and suffering.
Mm.
And he was in New York, I was in Washington, and back then, I kind of became very fond of the Department of Agriculture photo library. I
Mm.
realized that you could go in there and pick out a bunch of photos of agricultural practices and then just buy copies. They would make copies for you and send them to you, or you could pick them up. And they didn't care. I mean, these were all legitimate agricultural practices. What it was, slaughter or chaining little calves in crates. That was what that was standard agricultural practice and nothing to be embarrassed about.
Mhm.
So you could easily buy those images in full color. And I used to do that. I used to collect dozens and dozens of these slides, and I would put them in these plastic viewing sheets, so to speak. And every time I would run into Henry, I would say, Henry, look at this. This is the universe of pain and suffering.
Yeah, yeah. Wow.
And it took me 4 years. and and finally in 1985, I think it was,
Mhm.
he called me up and he said, I want you to be in New York at the headquarters of the animal protection society
Mhm.
at 9 o'clock in the morning. And I said, Henry, I have a schedule. You can't just call me the night before and tell me to travel to New York. And he
Mm.
said, yes, I can. You better be there. And I said,
So,
okay. So I came in and I couldn't believe my eyes. Here was the image of Henry working with the with a half dozen volunteers and making these major accomplishments. Nobody really knew where his money came from.
mm,
I walk in this room, and anybody in the movement is sitting there. There were about 30 people, heads of all the big organizations, the Humane Society, the anti-vivisection societies, all the organizations that would never say hello to me.
mhm,
I mean, because I was, grassroots and farm animals.
mhm, mhm,
they, they were all there. And Henry wasn't big on ceremony. So he just said, he welcomed everybody and he said, I'm hereby closing my coalition to end painful experiments on animals. And I am hereby launching a coalition to abolish factory farming.
mm. So you were over the moon. Yeah.
I know. I now understood why I had to be there.
Yeah. Yeah. He did. Yeah. He did make it clear you had to be there. Well, so you were elated, just,
And Henry was just as good and just as thorough and just as effective working for farm animals as he was in vivisection.
mm. Well, thank you for sharing that about Henry, because I didn't really know much about him. I have like gone on YouTube and seen that there are documentaries made about him. So there's information out there that I haven't
Well, Peter
seen yet.
Singer made the documentary about Henry Spira, and
That's right. Yeah, I watched a few minutes of it and got to see a young Peter Singer, which he looked different back then,
we
so
we
at
all
first I
we
didn't
all do.
recognize him. Yeah, we all do. Exactly. Um, yeah, so that's on my to-do list is to watch that and
And
also.
you wrote a book too about Henry Spira.
Oh, did he? Interesting. I haven't read that either. So, well, obviously. You mentioned a book that I wasn't aware of. It, I had actually looked up to see if you had authored books, and I didn't find any. So why is that? Maybe I'm just not very good.
Yeah, I was too preoccupied with getting things done, so I didn't really start writing until I semi-retired from farm, which was about 4 or 5 years ago. And I did write a book. It's mostly a memoir, but it also has two chapters on relating the Holocaust to use of animals for food, and
Hmm.
2 chapters on why animal rights.
Yeah. Well, has it been released?
Now I'm looking for a literary agent.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, yeah, I was ashamed that I had missed it if I had missed it. So, well, that's something to really look forward to. So you've been writing a memoir. You did this documentary. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, a lot of what I have to say is really in my blog essays, the
Hmm.
60 blog essays that you're referring to.
Right.
That contains probably 80% or of what the book has to say. The book is just more advanced.
Hmm. Kind of more, I guess, more cohesive since those are a bunch of
Yeah,
essays and
yeah,
right.
more cohesive, and and doesn't deal with such a variety of topics as the blog does.
Yeah, I'm very much looking forward to it. All the same, because there's something for me, like people who know me know I like to be at a coffee shop with a book or doing something like that. So I'll be very excited when that comes out. And please do let me know when it comes out. Maybe we'll get you back on the program if you want. Hopefully you'll be getting massive interviews when that comes out. But since you've been writing this and you did this documentary, the 5 decades, one mission.
Well,
Um,
we also did another documentary. We also did a documentary on the book itself.
oh, did you? Wow, interesting. And so that obviously hasn't been released yet then.
Right.
Right. Well, that's wow. We have a lot of really cool stuff to look forward to.
Yeah, that's a professional documentary. That was
Mm,
actually done by a professional director and editor and professional crew.
mm,
The 5 decades was more of an amateurish
mm.
job.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Um, do you have like an estimated timeline of when we might expect some of this stuff?
Well, the 5 decades is out now.
Right.
The other documentary, for which we still have not agreed on a title, probably in the spring.
Okay, wonderful. Well, I'm excited
Well,
about that.
it's in editing. All the shooting has been done.
Okay. Um, well, since you've been doing so much like biography type stuff, I guess you've been reflecting a lot, back over your storied career.
Yeah.
Um, and not to take too much more of your time, I think maybe we'll wrap up pretty soon. But can you just share some thoughts as you kind of look back over your career? I mean, I'll just say from my perspective before you even begin, it's just it's incredible. It's amazing. You spent a lifetime of dedicating yourself to animals in a movement that sees very high turnover rate. People get in the movement, they get out of the movement, and you've just uh, really stuck to your word that you said, I'm going to devote my life to this. And uh, I just have so much gratitude and appreciation for that. So thank you for that.
No,
But
thank you.
but from your perspective, what do you think
Yeah,
about?
I'm now I'm both the oldest active and oldest in age in this movement. The only other person who's been in it as long is Freya Dinshaw, the
Hmm,
wife of Jay Dinshaw.
right, right.
She actually got started before me. She got started in 1960,
Wow.
and she just retired as president of the American Vegan Society, and I think her daughter has taken over.
Wow. 1960. It's just incredible. And yeah, so man, you've been at it for so long, but when you look back over the course of those years, are there any moments that really stand out for you? And I want to know, I do feel like we're gonna run too long, but I didn't mention like these really interesting things that happened, like the USDA lockdowns that you took part in, some of the stunts, and sort of like the gritty work that you did. I kind of noted that, there was a lot of like real thoughtfulness put behind this, but you were someone who was like willing to get your hands dirty and do the campaign work and the hard work to bring everybody together. But yeah, and just maybe some thoughts of, as you look back, things you're proud of, that sort of thing.
That's what I'm most proud of is, well, two things. One is introducing uh, the farm animal concept to the U.S. movement, and I don't take full credit for that. Actually, I share credit with Jim Mason, who wrote the book Animal Factories with Peter Singer. He's really the one who introduced me to the concern for farmed animals.
Mm.
Uh, the book is mostly photographs. He spent several months with the photographer going around the country taking photographs of factory farms and the animals imprisoned in factory farms. And that was, I was helping with editing the book. As I said, he was one of the animal rights friends who were influenced by Peter Singer,
Mm-hmm.
and he was staying in my house, and I was helping him with the editing. And that's when I realized that being a vegetarian was a start, but it wasn't enough.
It's not enough, right?
So yeah, but then I said, Jim, why don't you and I start an organization for farm
Mm.
animals? He said, no, I just want to write books.
Mm.
And he went on to write more books. He wrote a book called The Unnatural Order, which is basically the history of oppression, how we started oppressing other living beings, and how that has continued to this day,
Mm-hmm.
starting with the oppression of women and weaker people and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And then he wrote several books with Peter Singer, more books with Peter Singer.
Mm. Well, yeah, you're a wealth of knowledge. This was like a gold mine of information for me. I really appreciate you, Alex.
Yeah, I should have warned you that when you open me up, it's hard to turn me off.
Well, no, it's a real pleasant surprise because when I'm just meeting someone for the first time, which we are for this conversation, the first time we've ever spoken, uh, I never know like how easy a conversation is going to be, and when someone can just go when I give them a bit of a prompt, it's a real weight off my shoulders as an interviewer that I know that you're gonna have a lot to say and a lot of very valuable things to say. Um, and yeah, I, I imagine you've done a ton of these interviews over the years, and so they probably come fairly naturally to you, and you seem very comfortable at doing them. And I guess that's the case, right? Although I want to point out something that your story's so incredible that I find it a little distressing that uh, I don't see like your story on all the major news networks, like big podcasts. Like I feel it's so sad that all of these incredible people in the animal rights movement that should be on these major platforms are largely ignored. And that's not to say that you haven't landed big interviews and that sort of thing. So it's not a diss on you or anything. It's just a kind of a diss on society that I feel like it should be really hard for someone uh, with a brand new podcast to get in touch with a guy like Alex Hershaft. And that's one of the things that kind of distressed me. That it's easy actually to get in touch and have these conversations, which is great personally. But I wish that you were in such demand that it was impossible, if that makes any sense.
Well, yeah, it's not that hard to get on podcasts. It's the fact that most of the podcasts are not very helpful to either me or the animals.
Mm.
They I'm there sort of as a novelty rather, and that's okay. But I've never gotten any letters from any of the podcasts. I guess I could look on the comments on the YouTube,
Mhm.
but they've never really led anywhere. In your case, I was kind of intrigued by your approach.
Hmm.
And also I hadn't done one for a while, so
Yeah, yeah. Well, as I pointed out to you, I really did see some commonality in what were some of our concerns, like with the history of the movement. And I didn't even mention that you had this really cool thing, this U.S. Animal Rights Hall of Fame, was like listing out people who are worthy of being in the Hall of Fame of the animal rights. I think that's an incredible idea. I'm really glad that that exists. And yeah, I'm going to make sure to link to all those things. Like your blog, this documentary, the 5 Decades, One Mission. And it's just been such a joy to talk to you, Alex.
thank you.
And I want to invite you back anytime. And also feel free to invite yourself back. I know you're a pretty busy guy writing your book and getting this stuff all out there. But always feel welcome on my program to come
Thank
if
you.
you just want to chat or anything like that.
Thank you.
Any final thoughts before I let you go, Alex?
So, yeah, one of the things I find fascinating there's that famous saying, if slaughterhouses had glass walls, we would all be vegetarians. I
Right.
don't agree.
Oh, yeah?
I think if slaughterhouses had glass walls, we would all be buying blinders.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a good point.
And the message behind this little statement is the fact that we are aware, we know what's going on, but we have found this amazing. It's a survival mechanism, I guess. If we became preoccupied by all the tragedies that are going on, we would have to commit suicide. We would
Hmm.
we would we would be leading a life of despair. You know,
Yeah.
so it's kind of a self-defense mechanism, and I don't think it's useful to show people slaughterhouse pictures. It's a turnoff, and it's more than a turnoff. It kind of gives people an excuse not to look into it further,
Hmm.
because it says, okay, if becoming vegan means looking at these horrible pictures, I don't want any part of it.
Hmm.
You know, there is a little bit of a difference. So, for example, if I feel terrible about what Israel is doing in Gaza, I can say, okay, I can send money, and that'll help a little bit.
Hmm.
But I don't have to change my life. Whereas in looking at slaughterhouse photographs, it's not enough to send money.
Hmm.
You actually have to, that every person's diet matters.
Right. Exactly.
It's not like we were, like it was kind of a universe of animal slaughter that we were contributing to. The number of chickens slaughtered that year, or turkeys, will be determined exactly by the number of people who bought a chicken in the previous year.
Mm. Right, right.
So it's directly related. You can take responsibility for a certain number of chickens
Hmm.
personally.
Yeah,
It's not abstract.
agreed.
So 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 this concept of uh, some people call it dissonance, cognitive dissonance, but we it was originally thought by the advertising industry in the 1950s. The concept of cognitive dissonance was considered revolutionary, and the idea was that people could not hold two conflicting thoughts in their mind at the same time, that they would feel very uncomfortable. Hell no. We do it all the time.
True, very true, very true. Yeah. Well, just to sort of touch on what you said, for me, the fact that we have that direct impact is actually empowering. Um, I know for some people it may feel disempowering or it may feel overwhelming, but to me, knowing that I have that impact was a huge relief because for decades and decades, I cared about the climate, I cared about the world's problems, and I felt very powerless to do anything about them. When I discovered what we do to animals and how directly I was affecting that, I also discovered what I can do about it, which obviously the first step was just not contribute to it and then raise my voice about it. And it gave me purpose, gave me purpose in my life. And similar, I think, to the way that you found your purpose. You not only found your purpose, you found your people, you found your clan, as you described, and and your life's work. And I like how um, you described, and I know we're going back all the way to the beginning. You described this like survivor guilt that you had made it out um, of the atrocity that was going on in Warsaw, and you said, "Why did I survive this?" Well, maybe I survived this so that I could be a voice for the powerless, and those were the animals, and you did that, and that's extraordinary. Yeah, I just I'd be very proud if I were you. I'd be very proud.
Thank you.
Um, and that's not to say, like the work continues, like the work goes on, and you're putting out your biography and everything. And we know the work's not done for the movement, but yeah, I hope that people who have done so much in the movement can take some of those moments to just feel a bit of a bit of joy and a bit of pride in what they have accomplished.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'll leave it there, Alex.
Mhm.
Alex, you're such a lovely guy. It's so great to meet you.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Well, take care, Alex. You have a good rest of your day, and we'll be in touch soon, hopefully.
All right. And I'll send you a complimentary copy of the documentary,
That'd be wonderful. And you
Five
you sign
Decades.
it for me. Can you sign it?
Well, it's not an object.
Oh,
It's
I see.
it's access to the YouTube where you can look at it.
Gotcha, gotcha. Well, you just send me an email or something that just writes Alex Hershaft, and we'll consider that your signature.
Okay.
All right. Appreciate you, Alex.